The evidence was there before I decided to trust him. That is the sentence I have spent years learning to say without the protective clause, without the but, without the nobody could have known, without the he was convincing. The evidence was there. I saw it. I made a decision, not once but many times across several months, to interpret it differently than it was. His name was Tomas, and he came into my professional life first and then into my personal life in a way that felt, at the time, like organic progression. He was articulate and self-possessed, with a kind of self-assurance I found both compelling and slightly disorienting. The disorientation, in retrospect, was information. When someone's confidence slightly exceeds their visible reasons for it, the gap between the two is usually being managed rather than filled. I noticed the gap. I decided it was charm. The first clear signal was a conversation I wasn't supposed to have. I was talking to someone who had worked with Tomas 2 years before, and she said something careful and minimal, the kind of thing people say when they are trying to give you the information without giving you the full story because the full story is complicated or still painful for them. She said, "Just be careful about the gap between what he says and what actually happens." She said it once, didn't elaborate, and moved on. I logged it and then I put it under a different category in my mind, the category of professional rivalry, of complicated history between colleagues, of the fact that people who haven't worked out well together sometimes speak dismissively of each other. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because the doubt was inconvenient. The second signal was a contract. There were terms in it that did not match what we had discussed verbally, and when I raised this he gave an explanation that was plausible and fluid and that I accepted, though the terms did not change. The acceptance required me to revise downward my expectation of what I was owed. I revised. I told myself this was pragmatism. That all professional relationships involve negotiation and compromise and that the verbal agreement had been imprecise anyway. The third signal was the first time I felt, in my body rather than my mind, that something was wrong. A conversation in which he was describing a decision he had made that affected me, and I realized as he was talking that he had made the decision before the conversation we'd had in which he had appeared to be asking for my input. He had been performing consultation. The performance was good, I hadn't seen it during the original conversation. I saw it now, from the vantage of hearing the outcome. My stomach did the thing it does when something has been revealed rather than new. Not the feeling of surprise. The feeling of confirmation. I said nothing. I went home and I thought about it and then I filed it in a third category. He is someone who makes decisions independently and then frames them as collaborative. This is a style difference, not a dishonesty. Many people operate this way. It doesn't mean I can't trust him. I want to stop here and be honest about what was happening in those moments of recategorization, because I think it is the most important part of this story and the most generally applicable. I was not being naive. I want to be clear about that distinction, because naivety and motivated reasoning look identical from the outside but they are different internal experiences. A naive person doesn't have the information that would change the assessment. I had the information. I was managing it. I was placing it into frames that neutralized it, and I was doing this work quickly and fluently and without acknowledgement, because acknowledgement would have required me to act on what I was seeing, and acting on it would have cost me something I wasn't ready to lose. What I wasn't ready to lose was the version of Tomas I had decided he was before the evidence started arriving. The working relationship that was going well. The sense that I had made a good professional judgment in aligning with him. These things had become part of a story about myself, about my competence, my discernment, my ability to identify people worth investing in. To revise the assessment of him was to revise the assessment of me. The motivated reasoning was protecting not just the relationship but my sense of my own judgment. This is the specific mechanism I have spent the most time examining. Not the trust, which was granted, but the maintenance of the trust after it became work to maintain, the ongoing reinterpretation, the reclassification of signals, the generosity of alternative explanation that I extended to him alone and not to myself or anyone else in my life. I did not extend that generosity accidentally. I extended it because it was cheaper than the alternative. The full picture arrived in a way that was not dramatic. That is also worth saying, because the story has the structure of a revelation and revelations are supposed to feel like lightning. This felt more like a room gradually brightening until I could no longer pretend I couldn't see what was in it. A pattern of commitments unmade. A pattern of framing that had always, when I looked back, favored him at my expense. A pattern of fluid explanation that accounted for every piece of evidence I raised in the same way that water accounts for the shape of whatever container it's in. When I finally named it to myself, not to him, to myself, sitting alone in a way I had been avoiding, the thing I felt most was not anger. I expected anger, because anger is cleaner than what actually arrived. What arrived was the particular shame of someone who has recognized their own complicity. Not complicity in what he did, he was responsible for that. Complicity in my own looking away. In the year of evidence management. In the dozens of small revisions I had made to the record in order to keep seeing what I wanted to see. The work of the aftermath was separating those two things, the accountability for what he had done, which was his, and the accountability for what I had done, which was mine. I had to look at both without collapsing them into each other. He had behaved without integrity. I had behaved without honesty, with myself, primarily. Both of those things were true and neither of them cancelled the other. What I carry from it is a practice of not allowing myself more than one recategorization. If something registers as a signal and I reclassify it as noise, and then a second thing registers as a signal, I owe it to myself to hold them together rather than classifying them separately. Single data points are ambiguous. Patterns are not. I knew the pattern before I was willing to call it a pattern. I gave it every reasonable alternative explanation first. The explanations were reasonable. They were also wrong. The evidence I needed was the evidence I had. I chose what I wanted to be true over what I could see. That is the only honest way to say it. And saying it honestly is the only way it changes. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.